Welcome to Finding Jesus, episode 6, I think we're in. It's part of our Knowing Jesus series. We're looking at different theological themes, Christological themes as they relate to the person of Jesus, and using art, literature, movies to just kind of be handles for these conversations. So my name's Brad, joined with Kyle and Mike. How are you guys doing?
Doing good.
Doing well.
As we
Doing well, sorry.
Well, you could be doing good too.
Yeah, sorry about that.
You could be doing good. Hopefully.
He's doing good. I'm doing well.
I'm actually just okay. I thought I would just put a positive spin on it.
Yes. Well, as we start this conversation, just want to start by how we start. Each one of these is just, what are you watching? What have you been reading recently?
Go ahead.
I've been reading over the last few days. It's just a few days thing. I've been because I'm probably, we do these culture sessions as a staff monthly. And one of the things I've been looking into is just how the pandemic has impacted relationships, friendships, friend groups. Not just the pandemic, actually, really the last year. So it'd be politics, it'd be all the divisive issues of the last
2020
year.
Just call it 2020.
2020, how has that impacted how many people have lost friends or basically discarded friends? And it's pretty sobering and pretty sad, actually, for people who've been friends for 20 years and then just, I just stopped hearing from that person, or I decided I'm never going to talk to that person again without even talking to them about the fact that I'm never going to talk to that person again. So it's sort of a sobering look at where we are relationally and culturally, something we probably have to figure out how to deal with and overcome and work through as a church, because I'm sure it's happened within the church as well. A lot of alienation going on in 2020 for all sorts of reasons, all sorts of cultural, political reasons. And just, what do we do about that? So I was reading there's a lot of articles out there, people who pretty proud of the fact that they dumped this lifelong friend because of the wrong political views.
It's like an
That's pretty sad.
odd, badge of honor.
It's an odd badge of honor. I mean, I'd rather have the approval of the people I'm writing this article for than to have this relationship with this person that we disagree about something on. Yeah.
That really bums me out.
Sorry, man. Start out on a bummer.
On that note,
I mean, I think it's all of that's really sad. I don't know, the prioritization of some of that over relationship.
Yeah, totally.
I don't know if I'm fascinated, but I'm always intrigued by what you're researching. So I appreciate it, because I think your mind operates differently than mine. You have these curiosities that are different than my curiosities, and you inform me, and I don't have to then do the research, which is nice.
You have to read the half dozen depressing articles.
Yeah, I don't have to have an app that sorts all of the different articles that I could see on Twitter. Mike just does that for us.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I'm not really an article guy, so I'm not that either. So I get most of my articles from you and a couple other people.
That's probably, fine.
Strange power that you have, Mike.
Yes.
Yeah. You hold a lot of influence over me, apparently. I've been reading, I can't remember if I've talked about Emily Dickinson. We did, I think, on here at some point, but I'm still reading that because it's, I think, her full works. So I just try and read a few poems each morning, and then I just finished a Tolkien reader, so it's Tree and Leaf, and I think Farmer Giles, which is kind of I don't know if he wrote that or if it was an old story that he just translated. And then there's some poetry, The Adventures of Tom Bombadil, which is all
cool.
Poetic. So it was like a 5 or 6 part Tolkien reader. So I have like a collection of Tolkien stuff that I'm going to try to make it through this year. So that was one down and many to go.
Was Tolkien's translation of Beowulf, did he finish it?
I think so.
Okay.
I think so.
I think there was something I think that came out a couple of years ago that that Jerem was talking about, where he was it was a translation work, because he was always like editing and tweaking it, so it was never like fully ready. But cool.
So I got the I think it's Silmarillion. I can never pronounce that right.
Silmarillion.
That's number 2, so that's what I'm starting tomorrow.
Cool.
Awesome. Yeah, we've I started a book last week called The Civil War is Theological Crisis. Kind of started it just to help, kind of get a different background for just these racial reconciliation conversations that we've been, going through culturally for the last couple of years. And as I started, I think there's just going to be some real interesting connection points between what the church's role and what it played in that time period of our nation's history, and then also kind of what is the church's role right now in a similar, I wouldn't say we're going through civil war in the same way that our country went through a civil war in the 1800s, but ideologically, philosophically, culturally, I would say they're definitely we're very polarized. And so anyway, it's been interesting so far. Started Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe with James. I've got 3.5-year-old, and he pays attention, which is cool. I mean, he's not picking up most of it. Like the questions he asks or he picks up on, it's like, oh, that doesn't matter, But it's it's just been fun to translate that as we to not just not calling the white witch, not calling her a witch, calling her just the white queen, just trying not to use the language of that with the little guy. But anyway, that's been fun. Well, this month, as we think about knowing Jesus, as we think about the person of Christ, kind of one of the themes we've identified, especially as we lead up to Easter, is the work of atonement that Jesus accomplishes for the church, for his people. And throughout history, different ways of understanding the atonement, different ways of even kind of theorizing, like, why was the atonement necessary? What did the work that Jesus did on the cross, like, what did it do? Why did it need to happen? So kind of two theories around this. And before we get into that, Mike, whenever you hear the word atonement, I think anytime we're going to wrestle with the differences between Christianity and other religions, differences between Christianity and even Judaism, is that question of atonement, that understanding of atonement. So I guess at its baseline, like, why is atonement necessary, and like, what does it mean to atone for something?
Yeah, I mean, I think we hear it in a couple of different ways. Biblically, in Romans, Paul talks about the sacrifice of atonement. So Jesus' sacrifice that brought atonement to us, that made right what was wrong in our relationship with God and others. There's a price that has to be paid in order to make something right. And I think, in a biblical sense, Jesus atones for our sin. We're unable to do it on our own. And then often we hear, often there's a sense of we're atoning for someone, for a mistake we've made, or potentially something someone else has done, but typically we're trying to make right something we've made wrong. And so that's often a cultural sense of atonement, is I did this bad thing, I need to make up for it. I need to make it right. And I think I think it's helpful for us to think of it in those two ways, because the biblical sense is something we can't do, we need, and we can't do, we're subject to, and because we have it, we are children of God because there's been a sacrifice of atonement. Otherwise we couldn't do it. And so, I mean, that's what I think of. The two different senses of it, the biblical sense that I need atonement, we all equally need atonement. Jesus' sacrifice provides it for us. But then we become children of atonement, and often making right something we did wrong is a good thing to do, when it's within our power, but our power is just limited. So stories of atonement, I think, resonate because, in keeping with all of we've talked about, we're image bearers. We're in this big story, whether we recognize it or not. we're sort of wired for atonement as a good and heroic thing, and I think so everyone can resonate with stories of atonement, because I think we're all image bearers, and that's part of being an image bearer in this fallen part of the story. Is atonement is something that we all have to have, whether we sort of recognize that theologically or not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really good. I mean, I think biblically, right? We see atonement in the Old Testament. We see the Day of the Atonement, the different sacrificial systems. We even see like the sins that one person commits towards his neighbor. There's different levels of reparation or ways of making it right, outside of even the spiritual realm of what God is doing with his people. You get the New Testament, and Jesus is described as this new sacrifice, this ultimate sacrifice, that his death on the cross does something for my standing in relationship with God, and my standing in relationship with my brother, with my sister, and even classically, we've seen different ways to understand that, right? There's the ransom theory where kind of Satan, because of sin, he's holding the world ransom, and Jesus' death on the cross as the Son of God was a ransom paid to Satan. That was real popular 4th century through 11th century. Like, we see now, especially in Protestantism, that we kind of talk more, we use these words like sacrificial atonement or substitutionary atonement, penal substitution. This idea that kind of is pulled out of Romans 6:23. The wages of sin is death. Free gift of God, right, is eternal life in Christ Jesus our Lord. And so I do think you're right. I think that's why this conversation really excites me, because that draw for atonement. I think you used the word, we're wired for that. I think is really good. We are wired for that because God, he is doing something. He's done something through the person and the work of Jesus. And so we want to just shed a little bit of light on that, have a conversation around that, just like we have in the last few months, as we kind of look at different movies or pieces of art that might help us understand the power of the atonement as well. So when we were talking last week, we threw out a few different kind of mediums, a few different movies. The classic one I think that comes to mind, right, is The Mission. If you've been in church for however many years, you've probably seen this movie used as an illustration. Mike, you've probably seen it used as an illustration more than Kyle or myself.
Yeah. So The Mission was it was Robert De Niro as a flagrant sinner, if you will, slave trader, bad guy. And he had a brother who was good in this, South America, probably. This mission in South America, as Jesuit mission, and in a fit of rage, he kills his brother, and he then tries to make atonement in some way. He tries to make up for it, even though you can't bring him back. And there's he would drag around like 100 pounds of armor behind him. So there's scenes of him, they're traveling, and he has to climb up this rock wall with this waterfall, and he's got 100 pounds of armor and a net behind him, and it's all symbolic of this guy carrying this weight, and then until finally one of the indigenous people there cuts the rope and frees him. So the people that he needed atonement from, these people, because he used to sell them into slavery, and also somehow to be accepted into the church, even though the church was trying to accept him, he wasn't accepting himself. And there's this, so that's why it was used so often in church service, because there's this sense of us dragging this weight around, and somebody else has to cut it off, as a picture of atonement. And like I said, we probably used it too much, but it is an arresting image that we all can sort of relate to, because we all can have that sense of, I was carrying this weight around, and now I can, because some atonement somehow happened, I can set the weight aside.
Yeah, or some, like, even to not that extreme, but we all feel a level of shame or guilt, or I think of myself, how many times I've felt like, I'm too guilty of this thing, whether it be something like anger or whatever, and I feel like I have to serve a certain amount of time before I can either like approach an individual or approach God even. It is a good
Right.
picture of that.
Yeah, right.
Why do you,
Like I don't want to pray right away.
yeah, why do you guys think
Because
that is? Like, why is that like a common?
well, I think, I mean, I, I don't think it's entirely inaccurate that, you talked about the different theories of atonement and the ransom or whatever, but the atonement makes us right, makes us able to have a relationship with God. It is God from whom we are estranged, and God must die to pay the penalty that we can't pay, to bring atonement, to bring us, so this sense that our guilt separates us. There's a sense of there's a truth there that the atonement overcomes, and without the atonement, it would be totally true. We'd be unable to speak to God. We'd be, we are unworthy. It's the atonement that makes us worthy and fills that gap. So I think there's a part of that that's true, and when we feel that, I think we have to then remember the atonement, accept God's grace to us, and that can drive us to be more people of grace or more people of shame and judgment, right? We've got one of two choices either way, where, I am guilty, I am unworthy. It's only in Christ, because of his grace to me, therefore I should give grace to others.
Well, and the power, I think, of like, because the pendulum swing could be, hey, I'm gonna try really, really hard to be good, or I'm gonna make every good decision I can, and almost like atone for our stuff on our own, which
Right.
doesn't
By being better.
by being
Right.
better. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was thinking
I
about.
think sorry, I was gonna say I think for me it's not understanding grace, not understanding God's grace. At least I don't know that I'll ever, this life understand it completely. So it's not understanding that, and it's so it's like an inability to let go, trusting in what God says of me and in God's forgiveness. It's difficult.
Yeah, I love that, Kyle. I was thinking this week. So in school, we went through this book called. I forget what it's called actually. It was Robert Peterson. He was talking about the salvation accomplished by the Son. That's what it was. Salvation accomplished by the Son. And in this book, in this work, he talks about the different saving pictures of what Jesus has done. And I think, Mike, what you were talking about, like why atonement is necessary. One of them is that Jesus restores the broken relationship that we have with God. I mean, fundamentally, that's what the atonement does. And there's all these different arenas that that the saving work of Christ can be applied in our lives. And I think the relational realm is one. The creational realm is another. Like the courtroom, right? The fact that like legally, we are guilty before God. All of our sin, right? It is directed towards God. It has consequences and it affects different areas of life. But so what Jesus has done on the cross, it justifies us. It makes us right. And it's because of his righteousness, because of his innate goodness, that he can be a perfect substitute, a perfect sacrifice. And I think that idea of sacrifice is also one that we see very prevalent in movies and in literature. I think we talk about the sacrifices that somebody makes, and for some reason, whenever we see it on a screen or we read it in the book, like it's it's maybe that much more telling. So anyway, as we were preparing for this, we also talked about a few different stories. Harry Potter comes to mind, right? The sacrifice that Harry's mother Lily makes for him. That is a theme that runs throughout the whole series, where Harry is safe, even around Voldemort because of this sacrifice that his mother made for him. We see Harry, his sacrifice himself, at the end of the series, kind of in a similar way. And his sacrifice, it's done freely. It's done on his own accord. It's done out of love, and that applies then to all of his friends. Like Voldemort can't touch them because of the sacrifice that he makes. But I don't remember, Kyle, if it was you or if it was Mike. One of the two of you talked about other sacrifices, especially in Harry Potter, that maybe even were more powerful or just as powerful. Was it Snape?
Yeah, we talked about Snape and Dumbledore. I mean, I think Harry and his mom were sacrificial from like the love for others and wanting to make something better for them. I think Snape and Dumbledore also had some of that, but they were certainly trying to atone for some of the things that they did. Right? Snape came from a darker background, where he was really with the bad side, right? And his whole, I think his whole transformation kind of hinged on his love for someone and trying to atone for the bad that he did and make up for his care for Harry through that. And certainly Dumbledore too, coming from I would say not as dark a past, but some definitely questionable stuff, and spends the last, I mean, really, probably decades of his life, but certainly when Harry gets to school, trying to train him up and help him and care for him in a way that will help him succeed, and ultimately giving of himself and helping Snape get to that place too, I think. So there's really, I mean, there's a lot of sacrifice in those books and movies that are really powerful.
Yeah, I think, in a sense, that's like the theme of the whole series, if you will. It starts with it and it ends with it.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of, in the books, it's described more as love than it is as atonement. But it's this, I mean, they're two sides of the same coin, right? I mean, Jesus said, greater love has no man than this, to lay down his life for his friends. In other words, love leads us to sacrifice for others, and sacrifice for others for their atonement. And so it's another way to look at atonement. Sacrificial atonement is because we love. It's an act of love. It costs us something. It's for their good. We lose out on stuff because we're doing it for their sake. I mean, that's all wrapped up in this idea of, that's why it's heroic, That's why it shows up in a lot of hero stories, that heroes, take the bullet. They go down. They do what needs to be done for the sake of others, and that's really just an echo of that biblical theme that greater love has no man than this, to lay down their life for a friend. So I think that's certainly, I would say that's an overarching theme. I'm not a big Harry Potter expert, but I've read the books and seen the movies, and I think that's a big overarching theme of, love, but love expressed through sacrificial action for others. Not a sappy, it's not Twilight, not that I read Twilight, but my sense of Twilight. Sort of a sappy romantic love. I don't know. I shouldn't have brought Twilight up because I don't know anything about it other than probably never watching it.
It's all right. We won't put it in the headline.
Yeah, well, edit that part out. Right.
Yeah.
I'm not even sure if am I a werewolf guy? Am I a vampire guy? I don't even know.
Is that the debate when it comes to Twilight?
Well, isn't it? Do I have that right?
It's Team something. One of the guys' names is Jacob, I think.
Edward?
Team something.
Is it Edward?
One of them is a werewolf.
That sounds right.
Yeah. Anyway, I don't know.
This took a turn.
Sure did.
A few years ago, I read a book called by Eric Metaxas, and it was 7 Men and the Secret to Their Greatness. And I don't remember everyone he highlighted, but I think Wilberforce was in it. Probably Bonhoeffer. He probably put like a little, George Washington, Jackie Robinson, and kind of the theme that he used that tied all of these men together was the sacrifices that they were willing to make for whatever good or whatever purpose they were doing that for. And I forget exactly all of them that he highlighted. I know George Washington, right? He sacrificed, being king. He sacrificed like a greater role for the good of democracy. Obviously, Jackie Robinson. I don't know if you guys have seen the movie 42, but I think it does a good job of depicting the sacrifice he made each and every day, both for the game of baseball, but to pave the path for his fellow African American brothers to be able to play in the game, but also just the larger civil rights movement that was happening at the time too. And obviously, similar to said about Bonhoeffer, he sacrificed his own safety, right, to remain in Germany. Ultimately his life to remain in Germany, to be faithful to the call God had on his life. And I think he's like, I don't want to minimize the sacrifices that these men made by any means, but I do think that the sacrifices that people make on a daily basis or weekly basis, are also just really powerful depictions of the ultimate sacrifice, right? They're echoes of the ultimate sacrifice that Jesus made on the cross. And I know, Mike, you were talking about the movie Lady Bird. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. And it's sort of a coming of age movie, and there's a mother. One of the key relationships is a mother-daughter relationship. In a lot of ways, it's a very imperfect relationship, or in some ways, maybe it's ordinary. It's less heroic on the surface, but it's more of a story of how do parents sort of normally and ordinarily sacrifice for their kids. Imperfect parents who say the wrong things, and who are laughed at later by their kids as they grow up into adulthood, which I think is all parents. There's a sense of there's a sacrifice that's part of that, that's baked into the cake of that. I don't want to say it's not heroic. I think it is heroic. It's just a different sort of heroism, which is basically just love, as we were talking about. It's just to love your child, you're going to sacrifice. It's going to cost you something. It's not all going to be wonderful days. And there's a sort of ordinariness, and yet somehow, heroic aspect to that sort of loving sacrifice, laying down your life for your children, even though you're wildly imperfect and they're rightly mad at you, and you're not some comic book hero. You're just a very imperfect person, but your love costs something, and it's worth it, in the end. Yeah. So that sort of resonated with me, even though it doesn't really, you wouldn't say it's an atonement story, or that the mom is even super likable.
Yeah.
Really.
Oh, she's not.
Right. So
I struggled with that one.
Yes, this is why I kind of like it, in that it's it's still an essential element of loving someone, even when you're super imperfect.
There's a quote from, I can't remember who it is now, but I heard it like a year or two ago, that somebody said love is always self-emptying before it's ever infilling. Mm-hmm. And I really liked that, because I think what you're speaking to feels like any loving relationship is going to demand some sense of, even if it's just sacrificing ego, which, I hope for myself to do that, because it'd be real easy to just live an ego-driven life. But if I want to love my wife well, or my kids well, my coworkers well, or whoever, it's gonna cost something. Maybe not even cost, but I have to give up something to do that.
Yeah, and one of the things I like about that movie, one of the flaws of the mom is she keeps reminding the kid of how much she sacrificed. She keeps reminding Lady Bird of all the stuff she's doing. And there's a certain amount of what's true, but it's unloving to blame the object of the love for the cost of the love. But there's a certain sense of you do have to wrestle with. There is a cost, and bearing and raising this child it's essentially a sacrificial act. Now, you might do it well or poorly. But that's essentially what it is. That's big, so don't be fooled, this is what it is. And that there's a goodness to that and a Christ-likeness to that. If we do it well. Because that's she's so sort of comic book imperfect at it, that it sort of brings into stark outline, what this whole thing really should be, and what it is to some degree.
Yeah, I like that a lot, because when you watch the Avengers movie, right, or if you watch like what I guess Superman, right, Man of Steel, like if you watch these larger than life figures who give themselves up because the fate of the world is on their back, and their sacrifice allows the whole world to be saved, like, even though that is kind of a direct one-to-one what Jesus does for humanity, it's almost a less poignant picture than these daily sacrifices that like a parent makes for their child. Like I can relate to that, right? Like I know the sacrifices that I make for my kids. Like I can see now probably better than I could then, but like the sacrifices that my parents made, for me, and those are, and maybe it's because they're rooted in love. Like maybe that's the connector. That helps me understand better what Jesus has accomplished and what He has done on the cross.
Yeah, I do think reflecting on, especially if you have wildly imperfect parents, which many people can relate to, that it's more like we're more like the ladybird who's grown up. Like we had wildly imperfect parents, but there was still a lot of there's still a lot of cost that I should recognize that was for me, that it's easy for me to take for granted. And there's cost. There's a cost to love, even if it's done, pretty imperfectly. And I think it's very relatable in that sense. We're not going to save the world, that we're not superheroes. But we're more like the bad news is we're more like Lady Bird's mom.
Oh gosh.
Than we are the Superman.
So
we do that grace we talked about earlier.
That's right.
Well, I was just going to ask, like that's, we've hit kind of the sacrificial side of what Jesus has done, that whole, the substitutionary atonement part of it. Like He self-sacrificed, He voluntarily went to the cross. But I kind of want to come back to the atonement part, right? Like what was Jesus doing that on the cross for? He was doing it on the cross because we have sinned against God, and we are the oppressors. We are we are the person who is in the wrong. He did something that we couldn't do because of his godness, because of His divinity, because of His goodness, His perfectness. But I think one of the themes that we see a lot in movies is this idea of I'm going to go and do something to atone for a past sin. I'm going to go and make something. I'm going to go and make something right. Whether that's the Robert De Niro's character in The Mission, right? He is carrying this baggage, and he can't even forgive himself, right, without doing all of this, this thing. Are there any other stories, any other movies that come to mind when you think about like people who are trying to atone for something they have done in their own past?
There's a little bit of that in Iron Man's story. We've talked about superheroes a little bit, but I think it's Ultron, so the second Avengers, right? He sets up like the world's defense system in these machines that goes horribly wrong. I feel like he's got a few different things he's atoning for, and that's why he's willing. Part of the reason why he's willing to sacrifice himself at the end. We talked about this a little bit too. The Grinch, the new one, right? Like which sounds silly to say because it's the Grinch, but he,
so good.
Steals everything from this town, and it's the love of a little girl that kind of changes his heart, and the rest of that, his confession to the Who's and his just trying to give everything back and make up for what he did, and then ultimately he's accepted. I mean, it's a cartoon, but I love that story.
Yeah, I really like that one. They gave more of the
mission.
Yeah, they gave.
It's like the mission. Grinch and the mission.
There you go. There's the title for this episode. They gave a little bit more of the backstory of the Grinch as to why he kind of did what he did, and that's what makes it so good. Like when Cindy Lou Who comes and like invites him to dinner anyway. It's powerful. Yeah, it's powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
and then that's that that I've done this and I need to do something to make it right, is sort of one flavor, and then another flavor is just the world is broken. I'm trying, like The Road, in The Road, the dad is looking after the son. I mean, the dad didn't make the world that bad, but the world is that bad, and he's trying to make it right in some sense. So there's the sacrifice, the sacrificial love, but there's also this sense of, keep the flame. Isn't he telling them to keep the flame alive?
Yeah.
Keep the flame, which is this, in the sense, this hope of atonement is hope that things will be right again. And it's a very dark book. Cormac McCarthy is it's a writer of some pretty dark literature. He's a brilliant writer. But The Road actually turns out to be probably his most hopeful book, because
it's
it
so
ends
bleak
with a sense of hope that things actually might be made right. And the dad dies, right? The dad, spoiler alert, the dad dies at the end, and passes his son on to this group of people who might actually make it better. So it's limited, it's imperfect, but there's a sense of there's hope. Because of this sacrifice, it brings some hope of making things right again. So he didn't make the world wrong, unlike the Grinch, who caused the problem. But there's still a sense of trying to make it right.
Yeah, that is a bleak, very bleak story. But he gives so much of himself, and I don't know. There's not even a ton of dialogue between him and the son, which is a kind of in a sense, a beautiful way to tell a story, because it speaks to how dark it is. But still, you can feel he cares for him, and in the end, it is in a really, I think, short bit of the book, very, very hopeful. It's a good payoff if you want to end on a hopeful note.
Right. Yeah. Well, in all of these, obviously, we are somewhat limited, right, in what these shows, what these movies, what these stories do represent, right? There's no such thing as a perfect metaphor. They are, I think, good, powerful kind of moments to help us understand and enter into the work that Jesus has done on the cross, and what even they help us understand, what that work was motivated by and what it accomplishes. But that is, I think, the one thing that makes Christianity so different from any other religion. Any religion is going to have to kind of speak to where does atonement come from? Why is atonement necessary? And as we kind of march towards the Easter season, as we kind of spend a little bit of time just intentionally reflecting on the work that Jesus has done on the cross, but ultimately his resurrection, that he does not stay dead, right? That's what makes his sacrifice, I think, powerful and effective, but also what gives us new life that we get to enter into. And so, if you've been enjoying these conversations, I invite you to go to our website, calvary.church/knowingjesus. You can find other episodes. You can also look at our YouTube channel. Past months' episodes are there as well. Also, we've been doing a class, and that's been fun too. So at this point, we only got one more week of it, and by the time this is edited and put together, the class will be over. So we will be.
Too bad.
Yeah, we are.
Maybe more though. Maybe more in the future.
Maybe more in the future. We definitely do. We want to cultivate a community where we are engaging in the arts intentionally, where we are looking at the things that we are watching and consuming, and asking deeper questions. Hey, what can we learn about the world that we live in? How can we even understand and make sense of this faith that we believe in light of this larger story that we all find ourselves in? So anyway, been enjoying this, and look forward to just kind of connecting with y'all further later down the line.